my son texted me, "We're cutting ties. Don't come to family dinner anymore." And the entire family group chat watched in silence. The next morning, I made one phone call that would destroy everything he'd built. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because what Alexander didn't know was that I'd been quietly collecting evidence of his crimes for 3 years. The message came through at exactly 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was sitting in my Upper East Side apartment, wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace and sipping green juice, when my phone buzzed with the family group chat notification. 30 years of tradition erased with a few thumb taps. Mom, we've decided it's time to cut ties. Don't plan on coming to family dinners anymore. This is what's best for everyone. I stared at the screen, watching the little check marks appear as each person read it. Victoria, my charming daughter-in-law, reacted with a crying laughing emoji. My brother Robert left it on red. My sister-in-law Janet sent cricket sounds. Not a single person defended me, so I took a screenshot. Evidence, darling. Always collect evidence. As I scrolled up through months of messages, the full picture came into focus. Birthday parties I was never invited to, weekend trips planned without me, graduations and holidays happening in a parallel universe where Margaret Wilson no longer existed. How very modern of them. The most recent photo Victoria shared was from their Hamptons vacation. My money had paid for those designer swimsuits and champagne toasts. Alexander's salary earned from the company I built funded every caviar-topped moment. The irony was so thick you could serve it at a dinner party. I set my phone down and walked to the kitchen window. 67 floors below, New York pulsed with people building empires, destroying enemies, and making deals that would change everything. How fitting that I'd be joining them today. My landline sat on the marble counter like an old friend. I picked it up and dialed a number I'd memorized 3 years ago, but had never used the number I'd saved for exactly this moment. 2 rings. Margaret Wilson, I said when she answered. I think it's time we finally had that conversation. There was a pause, then laughter-rich, knowing laughter that sent a chill up my spine. I was wondering when you'd call, she said. Well, wonder no more, I replied. How quickly can you meet? I can be there in an hour. I hung up and caught my reflection in the chrome coffee maker. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who'd read that text 90 minutes earlier. This woman had squared shoulders, a lifted chin, and something dangerous flashing in her eyes. Alexander wanted to cut ties. Perfect. I'd hand him scissors so sharp he wouldn't feel the cut until he was already bleeding. My phone buzzed. Agnew calling from his office line, probably panicking over my silence. I declined the call and watched his name pop up again, and again, and again. Delicious. 24 hours ago, I was dead weight. Now I was suddenly worth desperate phone calls. I typed one final message into the family chat. Message received loud and clear. Enjoy your last family dinner. Then I left the group. Some bridges you burn, others you blow up with dynamite and watch the pieces sink into the river below. Today, I was feeling particularly explosive. The family meltdown hit within minutes. Alexander called 17 times before switching to increasingly frantic texts. I sipped champagne and watched his desperation unfold while planning exactly how I'd dismantle everything he'd stolen from me. Mom, what did you mean by last dinner? Answer your phone now. This isn't funny anymore. Victoria's having a panic attack. Are you happy? Victoria's having a panic attack. That was Precious, the same woman who'd spent 2 years carefully erasing me from family photos, was now hyperventilating because I finally fought back. I scanned every message and added them to my growing evidence collection. Then my doorman buzzed. Mrs. Wilson, your guest has arrived. Send her up, Marcus, and no interruptions for the next 2 hours. Whatever happens, I'm unavailable. Eleanor Hartwell stepped off the elevator looking like she'd just walked out of a hostile takeover and won an Armani suit worth more than most people's cars, Louboutin heels sharp enough to puncture a man's ego, and a smile precise enough to perform surgery. Margaret, she said, air-kissing both my cheeks. You look absolutely radiant, Eleanor said. Revenge suits you. I smiled. I haven't even started yet. I led her into the living room, where contracts were spread across the coffee table like battle plans. Champagne, I said. We're celebrating. What exactly are we celebrating? Alexander's education, I replied. He's about to learn what happens when you dismiss the woman who built your playground. Eleanor's predatory gaze sharpened as she scanned the paperwork. These are your Wilson Enterprises shares, 49.8%. I never liked being controlling, I said with a laugh, though I suppose I'm about to become very controlling indeed. She settled into my Italian leather sofa, crossing her legs with the ease of someone who'd dismantled bigger empires before breakfast. Tell me everything. I pulled out a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse bank statements, printed emails, recorded conversations, photographs of Alexander and Victoria living far beyond their legitimate means, the kind of evidence that could bury someone so deep archaeologists would label them a historical artifact. Alexander thinks he's been clever, I said calmly, moving company funds through offshore accounts, creating fake vendor contracts, paying himself bonuses that would make a Fortune 500 CEO blush. I flipped through the records, and Victoria Sweet Victoria has been treating our charitable foundation like her personal shopping account. Eleanor let out a low whistle. This is embezzlement, multiple felonies, actually, fraud, tax evasion, breach of fiduciary duty. It's like they followed a criminal activity checklist. My phone buzzed again. Alexander calling. I declined it without even looking. Eleanor's shark-like grin widened. You're not answering? I learned that technique from them, I said. Funny how family communication becomes one-way traffic when it's convenient. I saved Eleanor's number in my phone, under partner in justice. So, she asked, what's your endgame? Simple. You buy my shares with very specific performance clauses. Clauses that give you full authority to audit every department, restructure management, and remove anyone guilty of financial irregularities. I paused. And my son Alexander is about to learn that actions have consequences. Victoria is going to learn that stealing from the wrong woman can end a career permanently. My voice softened just a fraction. And my grandson Luke will finally see what real strength looks like. Eleanor signed the contracts with a gold pen that probably cost more than Alexander's monthly car payment. This, she said, is going to be spectacular. Oh, darling, I replied, clinking our champagne glasses. Spectacular doesn't even begin to cover it. The revelation that erased my last trace of hesitation came courtesy of Victoria's own Instagram stupidity. While Alexander flooded my voicemail with panicked messages, his wife was posting stories from their so-called emergency family meeting, complete with champagne and oysters. Emergency indeed. I lounged in silk pajamas, watching their pathetic damage control play out online. Victoria had geotagged their location at La Bernardine, because nothing screams financial crisis like a $200 tasting menu. The woman had the survival instincts of a lemming, but the moment that truly hardened me came from my grandson Luke. Sweet 19-year-old Luke, the only one in that family with both a functioning brain and a moral compass. He called me at midnight, his voice shaking. Grandma, they're saying you've lost your mind. Dad says you're threatening to destroy the family business out of spite. And what do you think, sweetheart? I think they're lying, he said quietly. You don't do things out of spite. You do them because they're right. He hesitated. But Grandma, they're telling people you never loved Dad, that you only cared about money and power. I sat in the dark, city lights blinking below, and felt something inside me harden into pure resolve. 35 years of raising Alexander, 35 years of building something meant to outlive me, and this was how they rewrote history. Luke, I said gently, do you remember when you broke your arm at 8? Yeah, outside the Hamptons house. Who drove you to the hospital? You did. Dad was golfing. Mom was at the spa. And who stayed with you for 3 days, sleeping in that medieval device they called a chair? You, he said softly. You brought me comic books, smuggled in McDonald's when the nurses weren't looking. Your father visited once for 20 minutes to take a photo for social media. I let the truth hang between us. Does that sound like a woman who doesn't love her family? Silence. Then I said, Luke, I need you to understand something important. Wilson Enterprises employs 3,000 people. I created those jobs. One funded scholarships. I donated millions to hospitals and schools. Your father and Victoria have been stealing from that legacy, from those employees, and from your future. Stealing how? I explained it in terms a Columbia business student would grasp immediately: the diverted charitable funds, offshore tax schemes, fake vendors, money funneled into personal accounts. He understood within minutes. Jesus Christ, Grandma. Language, I said faintly. But yes, Jesus Christ indeed. So when you sold your shares to Eleanor, you sold them to someone who won't hesitate. I sold them to someone who can perform surgery without anesthesia, I said. Someone who won't let family sentiment interfere with justice. Luke swallowed. Are you going to destroy them? I considered the question carefully, slowly swirling imaginary wine in my empty glass. I'm going to give them exactly what they've earned through their own choices. Luke, nothing more, nothing less. Your father wanted to cut ties well. I happen to be exceptionally skilled with sharp instruments. Luke laughed despite himself. You're terrifying. Thank you, darling. It's taken 67 years to perfect the technique. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and reviewed Eleanor's preliminary audit findings. She'd moved with surgical precision, uncovering financial irregularities that made my own evidence look amateur by comparison. Alexander and Victoria weren't just thieves, they were incompetent thieves, leaving digital fingerprints everywhere. Tomorrow, the real education would begin. Eleanor's first audit meeting sent my son's panic straight into full-blown hysteria. She demanded financial records going back 5 years, full access to every offshore account, and explanations for any transaction over $50,000. Alexander called me 63 times. I counted them while getting a manicure. Mrs. Wilson, my nail technician, asked, glancing at my buzzing phone. Should I answer that? It keeps ringing. Oh no, darling, I said calmly. Let it buzz. It's like a very expensive vibrator. Eventually, the battery dies. She giggled while painting my nails a deep crimson red. Victory red. I thought by noon, Eleanor was texting updates that brightened my day more than Times Square. Alexander claimed the offshore accounts were strategic tax planning. Victoria insisted that charitable foundation purchases were necessary administrative expenses. Apparently, a $50,000 handbag was essential to nonprofit operations. I called Luke during his lunch break at Columbia. Grandma, campus is buzzing. Wilson Enterprises is under investigation. Someone posted about it on the business school forum. How fascinating, I said. What are they saying? That Eleanor Hartwell bought controlling interest and is auditing everything. Professor Martinez used it as a case study in hostile takeovers. He paused. Dad tried calling me this morning. I didn't answer. Good boy. What would you have said if you had? Probably something about reaping what you sow. I nearly choked on my green juice. I've raised you well. Actually, Grandma, I have a confession. His voice turned sly. I've been documenting their spending for months for a class project on family business ethics. Want to see Dad's credit card statements from the last year? Luke Wilson, I said, smiling. You beautiful, devious child. Email them immediately. 20 minutes later, I was staring at financial records that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Luxury vacations charged to company accounts, personal shopping sprees labeled as client entertainment, a $30,000 wine collection listed under office supplies. I forwarded everything to Eleanor with the subject line, dessert menu. Her reply came instantly. You've raised a delightfully ruthless grandson. At precisely 3 p.m., my landline rang. Alexander, calling from his office. Mom, we need to talk. Do we? Because yesterday you seemed very clear about cutting ties. I was angry. Victoria was upset about the foundation audit. Upset about being caught stealing. You mean, she wasn't stealing. Those purchases were legitimate business expenses. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Alexander, sweetheart, in what universe is a Hermes bag a legitimate foundation expense? Are we delivering aid to fashion-deprived regions? Silence, Mom. Eleanor's threatening to fire half the management team. How terrible. Perhaps they should have managed better. She's demanding access to our personal bank accounts. How invasive, I said lightly, almost like she suspects criminal activity. This isn't a joke. You're absolutely right. Embezzlement is very serious business. I admired my fresh manicure. I hear orange jumpsuits are quite stunning. Mom, please, we can fix this. Of course you can, by paying back what you stole. How generous, I added. The desperation in his voice was exquisite. 24 hours ago, I was dead weight. Now, I was his only lifeline. The irony was so perfect it deserved framing. What do you want? Nothing you're capable of giving, Alexander. I'll give you money. With what? Your Cayman Islands account is frozen. The sound he made was somewhere between a whimper and a death rattle. How do you know about that? Oh, I know everything, darling. I've known for 3 years. I was simply waiting for the right moment. I hung up and immediately called Eleanor. How's the audit progressing? Like Christmas morning for forensic accountants. We've uncovered 7 offshore accounts, forged vendor contracts, and enough evidence to keep federal prosecutors busy for years. And Alexander is crumbling beautifully. Victoria's already hired a criminal defense attorney. Perfect, I said. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. The first direct confrontation took place in the Wilson Enterprises boardroom, where Alexander attempted a pathetic coup against Eleanor's authority. Instead, he walked into a meticulously planned ambush that left him speechless and me deeply satisfied. I arrived in my best Chanel suit, the navy one that made me look like I could buy and sell countries before lunch. Eleanor had invited me as a consulting advisor, which was corporate code for front row seat, to watch your son implode. Alexander stood at the head of the mahogany table, surrounded by board members who had suddenly developed an intense interest in their coffee cups. Victoria sat beside him, clutching a designer handbag like a life preserver. The poor thing looked like she'd aged 5 years in 3 days. This audit is harassment, Alexander began, his voice trembling. Eleanor is overstepping her authority as a majority shareholder, Eleanor corrected smoothly. I now own 51% of Wilson Enterprises, thanks to additional shares purchased from your mother's personal holdings. Alexander's face drained of color, turning the shade of expired milk. That's impossible. Mom only had 49.8%. Yes, Eleanor replied calmly, but I also purchased shares from your Uncle Robert and Aunt Janet last night. She smiled like a predator who'd finally cornered especially slow prey. They were quite eager to sell once they learned about the federal investigation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Board members shifted in their seats, slowly realizing they weren't attending a meeting, they were witnessing an execution. Federal investigation. Alexander's voice cracked. Oh yes. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit finds embezzlement particularly fascinating, especially when charitable foundations are involved. Eleanor opened a folder thick enough to stop bullets. Would you care to explain these transactions to everyone? She slid the evidence across the table: credit card statements, bank transfers, receipts for purchases extravagant, enough to make lottery winners blush. Alexander's hands shook as he recognized his own crimes laid bare for public viewing. This is a misunderstanding, he stammered. Those were legitimate business expenses. A $60,000 watch is a business expense, board member Harrison asked sharply. Client gifts require quality, Eleanor added helpfully. Charged to the Children's Cancer Foundation account. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife and served it at dinner parties. Victoria let out a small whimper, like a wounded animal realizing the trap had already closed. I rose slowly, letting decades of boardroom authority command the space. Every eye turned toward me, and I savored the moment like an expensive vintage. Alexander, I said, my voice carrying across the room like steel wrapped in silk. Do you remember what I taught you about consequences when you were 7? Mom, please, you stole cookies from Mrs. Henderson's kitchen and blamed the housekeeper. A woman supporting 3 children lost her job because of your lie. I stepped closer, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. What did I make you do? Alexander's face collapsed. Confess, and work to pay back her lost wages. Exactly. Actions always have consequences. I turned to the board. My son forgot that lesson. Victoria helped him forget it. Today, they remember. Eleanor glanced at her legal pad with theatrical precision. By majority shareholder vote, Alexander Wilson, you are hereby terminated from all positions within Wilson Enterprises, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You can't do this. Actually, Eleanor said pleasantly, I can, and I am. Her smile could have frozen hell itself. Victoria Wilson, Eleanor continued, you are banned from all company properties pending criminal charges. Victoria finally found her voice. Margaret, you're destroying your own family. I looked at the woman who had erased me from family photos, stolen from charities I built, and convinced my son to treat me like disposable garbage, now calling me family because she needed saving. Darling, I said, adjusting my grandmother's pearls, I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply taking out the trash. Security appeared as if summoned by fate. Alexander and Victoria were escorted out like common criminals because that's what they were. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence. Now then, Eleanor said cheerfully, let's discuss replacing leadership with people who understand the difference between company funds and personal shopping budgets. Through the window, I watched Alexander and Victoria standing on the side, lost and utterly defeated. Justice, I decided, was absolutely delicious. Allies emerged from unexpected places, validating every decision I'd made and proving Alexander and Victoria's reign had hurt far more people than just me. By week's end, I had an army. Luke called Tuesday morning, his voice bright with vindication. "Grandma, you won't believe what's happening at school. Professor Martinez wants to use your case as the semester's capstone project. How proper corporate governance protects stakeholder interests. How academic of him." And 3 of Dad's former employees reached out to me on LinkedIn. They want to thank you for finally stopping what they called the hemorrhaging. Dad was laying people off while giving himself raises. Mom was cutting children's programs to fund luxury trips. I sat in my silk robe, sipping coffee that cost more than most people's hourly wage, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Validation. Not just financial victory, but moral clarity. "Luke," I said, "invite them to lunch somewhere nice." "My treat. Are you building an alliance?" "I'm building something better," I replied. "I'm building proof that we were right." An hour later, Eleanor called, practically purring. "Margaret, you need to see today's audit results. Alexander wasn't just stealing from the company, he was stealing from employee pension funds." "How much?" $2.7 million over 3 years, redirected to offshore accounts to fund their lifestyle. Her voice sharpened. "Employees, retirement security paid for Hamptons, renovations." I felt my blood pressure spike into dangerous territory. Stealing from me was personal. Stealing from them was unforgivable. Stealing from loyal employees, the people who had built this company with their sweat and dedication, unforgivable. "Eleanor," I said calmly, "I want every penny recovered and returned to those pension funds. I don't care what it costs." "Already in motion," she replied. "And one more thing, the FBI wants to interview you tomorrow. Apparently your evidence collection is so thorough, they're calling it a prosecutor's dream." "How flattering." "There's also interest from the Wall Street Journal. They want an exclusive interview. Business matriarch takes down corrupt dynasty is their working headline." I considered it carefully. Public vindication versus private satisfaction. The chance to tell my story against the quiet pleasure of watching Alexander squirm in silence. "Schedule it." That afternoon, I met with Alexander's former employees at La Bernardine, the same restaurant where Victoria had celebrated my supposed downfall just a week earlier. 3 women sat across from me, all middle management, all looking haggard from months of stress I hadn't known I was helping create. "Mrs. Wilson," said Janet Morrison, former head of human resources, "we thought you knew about the layoffs, about the pension fund transfers, the budget cuts, while executive compensation kept rising." "I was deliberately kept uninformed," I admitted. "My own son made sure I couldn't see what was happening." "We wanted to contact you directly," Sandra Chen, the former finance director, added. "But Alexander told us you'd moved into assisted living, that you had dementia." The coffee cup in my hand trembled. "He told people I had dementia. Complete cognitive decline," Sandra said quietly. "He said you couldn't handle business decisions anymore. That's why he needed full control of company operations." The restaurant's elegant atmosphere suddenly felt suffocating. My own son had declared me mentally incompetent, not just to steal from me, but to justify stealing from every person who had trusted Wilson Enterprises with their future. "Ladies," I said, setting my cup down with surgical precision, "would you like to help me ensure justice is properly served?" Their immediate nods confirmed what I already knew. Alexander and Victoria hadn't just made an enemy of me, they'd created an entire network of people praying for their downfall. "Perfect," I said. "Eleanor is hiring new management. You'll receive calls tomorrow about returning to your positions with real authority to make sure this never happens again." "Mrs. Wilson," Sandra asked softly, "why are you helping us? We failed to protect the company." "You didn't fail," I said gently. "You were systematically undermined by people you trusted." I felt my grandmother's steel spine straighten within me. "And because, darling, no one steals from my people and lives to enjoy it." As I walked out of the restaurant, I realized something had shifted. This was no longer just about revenge. I was leading a revolution. Every revolution needs willing soldiers. Alexander had no idea what kind of army was coming for him. The revenge reached its perfect crescendo when Eleanor called an emergency shareholder meeting and exposed everything publicly. Alexander's complete financial destruction unfolded in front of everyone who had ever doubted me, and I watched with a satisfaction that bordered on spiritual. the Pierce Conference Center buzzed with anticipation. Shareholders, board members, journalists, and federal agents filled every seat. I took a place in the front row, wearing my late mother's diamond earrings and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Across the aisle, Alexander looked like he'd aged 20 years in 10 days. Eleanor commanded the podium, like a conductor leading an orchestra of financial ruin. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "today's presentation concerns the systematic embezzlement of Wilson Enterprises funds by former CEO Alexander Wilson and his wife, Victoria Wilson." The screens lit up behind her, evidence so comprehensive, it made my months of careful documentation look amateur. Bank transfers, forged documents, email chains discussing creative accounting. Alexander's digital trail of greed, played out in high definition for all to see. Over 4 years, Eleanor continued, the defendants redirected $8.3 million from company operations, employee pension funds, and charitable foundations into personal offshore accounts. A murmur swept the room. Alexander slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. Victoria wasn't present. Her attorney had advised against public appearances after yesterday's federal indictment. The lifestyle funded by these stolen funds included luxury vacations, designer purchases, real estate investments, and personal expenses totaling 3 times Mr. Wilson's legitimate salary. Another click. Photos from Alexander and Victoria's social media appeared on screen. Champagne toasts in Santorini, funded by children's cancer research. Designer gowns, bought with employee pension money. A yacht rental paid for with donations meant for homeless shelters. The Wall Street Journal reporter scribbled furiously, "This would be front-page news by morning." Most egregiously, Eleanor said, when employee layoffs became necessary due to artificially reduced operating funds, Mr. Wilson approved a 40% increase to his own salary. The room exploded. Shareholders shouted. Employees demanded answers. And somewhere beneath the noise, I heard Alexander make a sound like a dying animal. I stood slowly, letting my presence draw the room into silence. The room fell completely silent. "If I may," I said, my voice carrying across the space with 40 years of boardroom authority, "I'd like to address my son directly." Eleanor stepped aside and yielded the podium with a gracious nod. I walked to the microphone, aware of every eye tracking my movement. This was my moment, the culmination of everything I'd built, lost, and reclaimed. "Alexander," I said, looking directly at the broken man who had once been my pride and joy, "stand up." He rose unsteadily, as if his legs might give out beneath him. "You told people I had dementia," I continued evenly, "that I was incompetent to make business decisions, that I had never loved you." My voice didn't waver. Every word was deliberate. "You erased me from this company's history. You excluded me from family gatherings. You instructed others to treat me like a burden." The silence was absolute. You could almost hear hearts breaking. "But most of all, Alexander," I said, pausing, "you forgot who taught you everything you know about business, about ethics, about the difference between right and wrong." I let the truth settle. "Today, I finished. You remember." I turned to the room. "Wilson Enterprises will continue operating under new leadership. Every stolen dollar will be recovered and returned to its rightful purpose. Every employee wrongfully terminated will be rehired with full benefits and back pay." Applause exploded from the employee section. Several people openly wiped away tears. "As for my son," I said, turning back to Alexander, who was now crying without restraint, "criminal charges have been filed. Federal authorities will handle justice from here. My role is simply to ensure that the empire I built continues serving the people it was meant to serve." Eleanor returned to the podium. "The FBI has requested that Mr. Wilson remain available for further questioning. His passport has been surrendered pending trial." I returned to my seat feeling lighter than I had in years. Around me, shareholders celebrated the promise of recovered investments. Employees cheered the restoration of their stolen security. Journalists captured every moment of corporate justice unfolding in real time. Alexander remained standing, swaying slightly, staring at faces that had once respected him and now saw only a common thief. Justice, I reflected, was even more satisfying when served publicly, through the windows. News vans were already arriving. This story would be national by evening, international by week's end. My son's disgrace would follow him everywhere, while my vindication rebuilt the legacy he had tried to destroy. Perfect. Alexander's final, desperate attempt at retaliation arrived through Victoria's family lawyer. They were threatening to sue me for elder manipulation and coercive influence. The absurdity of it only strengthened my position and added yet another layer of evidence to their moral bankruptcy. I was enjoying morning tea on my terrace when Eleanor called, laughing so hard she could barely speak. "Margaret, you need to see this lawsuit Victoria's family just filed. It's comic genius. What are they claiming now? That you manipulated your elderly, diminished mental state to trick innocent young people into signing illegal contracts." Eleanor's laughter grew louder. "They're claiming you have dementia and, therefore, couldn't legally sell your shares." I nearly choked on my Earl Grey. The same dementia Alexander claimed I had to justify stealing from employee pension funds. The very same, Eleanor confirmed. "Their entire defense is that you're somehow too mentally incompetent to make business decisions, but too mentally competent to be held responsible for their prosecution." How delightfully contradictory. It gets better. They want to invalidate the share transfer agreement because you were allegedly under undue stress when you signed it. Apparently, being excluded from family dinner constitutes psychological duress. I set my teacup down and looked out over Central Park, watching joggers move with focus and purpose energy that mirrored my own. "Eleanor," I said calmly, "schedule a press conference today. What's your angle?" "If they want to portray me as a frail, confused old woman," I replied, "then let's give them a demonstration of exactly how frail and confused I am." 2 hours later, I stood before the assembled media in my sharpest Armani suit, wearing a smile that could intimidate Supreme Court justices. Cameras flashed as I approached the podium. My posture was straight as steel, my voice carried for decades of corporate authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "I'm here to address recent claims about my mental fit made by individuals currently under federal investigation for embezzlement." I lifted a manila folder thick enough to stop bullets. "These," I said, lifting the folder, "are the financial records I personally compiled over 3 years documenting systematic theft from Wilson Enterprises." I opened it deliberately. Bank statements, transaction histories, correspondence, recorded conversations, all gathered through my allegedly diminished mental capacity. Laughter rippled through the press corps. "I want to be very clear," I continued. "My son, Alexander, and his wife, Victoria, spent 4 years stealing from employee pension funds, charitable foundations, and company operations. When confronted with overwhelming evidence of their crimes, they did not express remorse. They did not offer restitution. Instead, they hired lawyers to attack my mental competence." A reporter raised her hand. "Mrs. Wilson, how do you respond to claims that you were manipulated by business rivals?" "I respond," I said calmly, "by pointing out that I graduated summa cum laude from Wharton Business School in 1976, built a $300 million company from a single fabric store, and personally identified and documented complex financial crimes that federal agents described as prosecution-ready evidence." I paused deliberately. "If that's diminished mental capacity," I added, "I'd hate to see what they consider sharp thinking." More laughter followed. "And now, the claim of psychological duress," I continued. "Yes, being excluded from family gatherings was painful. But do you know what's more painful? The room quieted, learning that your son told employees you had dementia to justify stealing their retirement security, learning that charitable donations meant for cancer research funded luxury vacations, learning that your own family viewed you not as a mother or founder, but as an obstacle to their criminal enterprise." Silence fell over the room. "So yes," I said evenly, "I was under stress. The stress of discovering that people I loved and trusted were thieves. The stress of realizing I'd raised a son who would steal from children's cancer foundations to buy designer handbags. The stress of watching my life's work destroyed by people who mistook my patience for weakness." I closed the folder with a decisive snap. "Alexander and Victoria Wilson are criminals. They were caught, they were prosecuted, and they are being held accountable. Their attempt to claim I'm mentally incompetent only proves they still don't understand the most basic principle I taught them as children. Actions," I said, "have consequences." A reporter called out, "What's next for Wilson Enterprises?" "Excellence," I replied, "integrity, and a return to the values that built this company before it was corrupted by people who confused theft with strategy." I gathered my papers. "Thank you for your time." As I walked away from the podium, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this ordeal began, not just vindication, but genuine peace. The public record was clear, the legal record was unshakable, and my reputation was not only restored, but strengthened. Eleanor waited by the exit, grinning like a shark who'd just discovered a full buffet that, she said, was beautiful. That, I replied, was necessary. Now Alexander knows that even in his complete disgrace, he still can't touch me. My phone buzzed with a message from Luke. Grandma, you're trending on Twitter. #business matriarch is #1 worldwide. I smiled. Everything had aligned perfectly. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive quietly. Sometimes it comes with spotlights and standing ovations. Alexander's final desperate attack had handed me complete and total victory. Perfect. My transformation reached its peak when I walked into my first board meeting as the new chair of Wilson Enterprises, commanding respect earned through battle and authority claimed through justice. The woman who entered that room was nothing like the one Alexander had dismissed 6 weeks earlier. I wore my grandmother's pearl necklace, the same one I'd worn the morning Alexander sent his text, and a bespoke Chanel suit that cost more than Victoria's stolen handbag. My silver hair was styled in a power bob that announced authority before I spoke a word, reflected in the conference room's glass walls was someone I barely recognized. Shoulders squared, spine straight, eyes sharp as precision instruments. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, taking my seat at the head of the mahogany table where Alexander once tried to erase me. "Welcome to the new Wilson Enterprises." Board members, some longtime allies, others carefully vetted additions selected by Eleanor, listened with rapt attention as I laid out our reconstruction plan. Every employee Alexander wrongfully terminated would be every stolen dollar would be returned to its intended purpose. Every corrupt practice would be systematically eliminated. "Our first quarter under ethical leadership shows remarkable results," Eleanor reported, flipping through financial documents that told a story of rapid recovery. "Employee morale is at a 5-year high. Charitable foundation efficiency has increased by 60%, and we've attracted 3 major clients who refused to work with us under the previous management." Board member Harrison raised his hand. "Mrs. Wilson, what about the criminal trials? Alexander and Victoria are facing federal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion." Eleanor answered, "Their trials begin next month." I smiled, the kind of satisfaction that bordered on predatory. "I'll be testifying as the government's star witness." I let that settle before continuing, "And the company's reputation has never been stronger. Yesterday, Harvard Business School requested permission to use our corporate governance transformation as a case study. The Wall Street Journal called us a masterclass in stakeholder capitalism. Forbes wants me on their cover." Murmurs of approval moved around the table. These were people who had watched me dismantle corruption piece by piece, rebuild institutional integrity, and emerge as a business leader worthy of international recognition. The contrast with Alexander's disastrous leadership couldn't have been sharper. "What's our 5-year projection?" asked Sarah Chen, a new board member I'd recruited from Goldman Sachs, specifically for her expertise in ethical financial management. "Conservative estimates suggest 20% annual growth," Eleanor replied, "driven by our reputation for integrity and our commitment to stakeholder value over pure profit extraction." I clicked to the next slide. "We're also launching the Wilson Foundation's new scholarship program, fully funded by recovered stolen assets." The irony was delicious. Money Alexander and Victoria had stolen from charitable causes would now fund education for deserving students who embodied the integrity they had completely lacked. "Mrs. Wilson," longtime board member Roberts asked, "how do you feel about your transformation?" I considered the question carefully, looking around the room at faces filled with genuine respect, rather than the thinly veiled dismissal I'd endured under Alexander's rule. 6 weeks ago, I said, my voice steady and edged with steel, I was cold, dead weight. I was excluded from family gatherings and dismissed as irrelevant. I met their eyes one by one. Today, I'm the chair of a $300 million company, a federal witness in a major criminal case, and apparently trending on social media as an inspiration to businesswomen. Laughter rippled through the room. "But this transformation isn't just personal," I continued. "It's institutional. Alexander led through fear, theft, and deception. I lead through transparency, accountability, and earned respect." I stood, feeling every inch of my height, every year of my experience, every ounce of power I'd reclaimed through strategy and resolve. "When people follow you out of fear," I said, "they abandon you the moment they find courage." When they follow you out of respect, they become partners in building something that lasts. Eleanor nodded. Speaking of allies, we've received partnership inquiries from 12 companies who specifically cited your leadership as the reason they want to work with Wilson Enterprises. Employee productivity is up 30%, voluntary turnover is down 60%. And yesterday, 3 former employees who left under Alexander's leadership called asking to come back. I thought about the woman who'd read that devastating text 7 weeks earlier, hurt, disoriented, questioning her own worth. The woman standing at that table had answers to all of it, and the power to make sure those questions were never asked again. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, gathering my papers with deliberate authority, this company will never again be held hostage by people who mistake cruelty for strength or theft for success. We build value through integrity, we lead by example, and we prove every day that doing the right thing is also doing well. The standing ovation that followed was something Alexander had never received. Not once, in all his years of leadership. Perfect. The public vindication reached its true crescendo when Wilson Enterprises received the Corporate Integrity Award at the National Business Ethics Conference. I accepted the honor, before an audience that included former skeptics who now stood and applauded my complete transformation. Walked onto the Lincoln Center stage, wearing the pearl necklace that had become my symbol of resilience and a navy Armani gown that announced victory without saying a word. 3 months earlier, I'd been dismissed as dead weight. That night, I was celebrated as a model of corporate courage. Ladies and gentlemen, the presenter announced, this year's Corporate Integrity Award goes to Wilson Enterprises, under the transformational leadership of Chairman Margaret Wilson, for proving that ethical business practices drive both moral and financial success. The auditorium erupted in applause as I walked toward the podium. In the front row, I caught sight of Luke grinning with pride, Eleanor discreetly recording on her phone, and several journalists who had followed my story from corporate disgrace to national recognition. Thank you, I said, my voice steady, carrying the confidence earned through struggle and resolve. 7 months ago, I discovered that members of my own family had been systematically stealing from our company, our employees, and our charitable foundations. The room grew still. Today, every stolen dollar has been recovered and returned to its rightful purpose. The applause surged again. But this award isn't just about exposing corruption, I continued. It's about proving something bigger, that businesses built on integrity don't merely survive, they thrive. Since we implemented transparent governance practices, Wilson Enterprises has attracted new clients, retained exceptional employees, and increased both profitability and social impact. I lifted the crystal award, watching light fracture through its edges like hope breaking through darkness. This recognition belongs to every employee who continued doing the right thing under corrupt leadership, to every board member who chose transparency over convenience, and to every stakeholder who believed that business can be a force for good. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. As the applause washed over me, I thought about the journey from humiliation to vindication, from dismissal to leadership, from victim to victor. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded me for interviews that would be broadcast around the world. A documentary filmmaker asked to tell my story. 3 publishers proposed book deals. Harvard invited me to deliver their commencement address. A CNN business correspondent asked, Mrs. Wilson, what would you say to other family businesses facing similar corruption? That loyalty to family does not require tolerance for criminal behavior, I replied. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their choices. I smiled, the warmth of it settling deep in my chest. Actions always have consequences. Another reporter asked, do you regret exposing your son's crimes? My only regret is not acting sooner, I said. Every day I hesitated was another day employee retirement funds were stolen. Another day charitable donations were diverted. Another day corruption was allowed to feel normal. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I regret letting love delay justice. And what's next for Wilson Enterprises? Excellence, I said simply. We're expanding our scholarship program, opening operations in 3 new countries with strict ethical oversight, and launching an initiative to help other family businesses implement transparent governance. I adjusted my grandmother's pearls. We're proving that integrity isn't just the right choice, it's the profitable one. Later that evening, at the celebration held in my honor, calls poured in from business leaders, politicians, and activists inspired by my story. The mayor wanted to discuss economic development initiatives. The governor invited me to join her Business Ethics Advisory Committee. A senator floated my name for a federal commerce position. Luke found me on the hotel terrace, city lights sparkling below like diamonds scattered across black velvet. "Grandma," he said, laughing, "you're famous." "I'm vindicated," I replied gently. "There's a difference." He studied me. "Are you happy?" I watched the traffic flow beneath us, rivers of light moving steadily forward. "Happy?" I thought for a moment. "I'm at peace, Luke. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to do." I smiled at the young man who had never once doubted my integrity. "And yes," I added, "that makes me deeply happy." The irony wasn't lost on me. Alexander had tried to destroy my reputation and instead made me more powerful than ever. Victoria had tried to erase my legacy and helped me build something even more meaningful. Sometimes justice doesn't just restore what was taken. Sometimes it gives you something better. That night, surrounded by recognition earned through courage, I realized my greatest victory wasn't defeating Alexander and Victoria. It was becoming the woman I was always meant to be. 6 months later, the legacy I've built proves that the best revenge is living so well your enemies fade into irrelevance. Now, I sit in my downtown loft, surrounded by art instead of awards, funding dreams instead of fighting nightmares, finally understanding what real power looks like. This morning began like every Saturday for the past 3 months. Luke arrived at 10 with coffee and croissants from that little French place near Columbia, settling into his usual spot on my Italian leather sofa. At 19, he has more integrity than his father ever did. And watching him grow into a man of principle has become one of my greatest joys. "Grandma, Professor Martinez wants to interview you for his new book on ethical leadership," Luke said, pulling a stack of academic papers from his backpack. "And 3 more family-owned companies contacted the university asking for guidance on transparency initiatives. How many does that make this month?" I asked. 15. "You're officially becoming the go-to expert on corporate governance reform." He grinned. "Who knew exposing your own son's crimes would turn into a business model?" I laughed as I reviewed applications for the Wilson Foundation's newest scholarship cycle. 50 brilliant young women from low-income families each, receiving full university funding, along with long-term mentorship. The money Victoria once stole to buy designer handbags was now paying for education, opportunity, and futures. "Speaking of business models," I said, signing approval letters that would alter 50 lives, "Eleanor wants to formalize our consulting partnership. Apparently, family businesses around the world are requesting the Margaret Wilson treatment for their corruption problems. Are you interested?" Luke asked. At 67, I've discovered I have a talent for corporate exorcism, I said dryly. "Why waste it?" My phone buzzed. A message from Eleanor. Netflix approved the documentary, Margaret Wilson, the woman who wouldn't disappear. Production starts next month. The irony was perfect. Alexander had tried to erase me and instead made me unforgettable. "Luke," I asked quietly, "do you ever wonder what your father's doing now?" His expression shifted. "Actually, I saw him last week. He's working at a consulting firm downtown, some junior analyst role." He hesitated, searching for the right words. He looked smaller, like he'd shrunk. "And Victoria divorced him 2 months ago," he added, "moved to Los Angeles with the kids. Apparently, she's trying to become a lifestyle He rolled his eyes, teaching authentic living under a fake name to avoid her criminal record. What surprised me was what I didn't feel. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just calm indifference. The people who once dominated my life, who caused so much pain and rage, had become footnotes in a story, no longer centered on them. "Do you miss them?" Luke asked softly. "I miss who I believed they were," I said. "The son I thought I'd raised, the family I imagined we could be." I set the papers aside and looked at the young man who had never once disappointed me. But I don't miss the reality of who they actually were. That afternoon, I made my weekly visit to the Wilson Foundation's new headquarters, a restored Brooklyn brownstone where young entrepreneurs receive funding, mentorship, and space to build ethical businesses. That day, I met with Maria Santos, whose sustainable fashion startup had just landed its first major retail contract. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, laying out clothing prototypes made from recycled materials, "I want you to understand what this opportunity means. 3 years ago, I was cleaning office buildings at night to support my kids. Now, I employ 12 people and I'm proving business can be both profitable and responsible. That, I told her, is exactly why we exist. To prove success doesn't require sacrificing your soul. Walking through that building, watching women of every background create companies rooted in integrity instead of exploitation, something became clear. My greatest victory wasn't destroying Alexander's criminal enterprise. It was building something better in its place. As evening settled, I returned to my loft and called Eleanor to discuss next week's board meeting. Wilson Enterprises continued to thrive under ethical leadership, now valued at over $400 million and internationally recognized as a model of stakeholder capitalism. Margaret, Eleanor said, I have news. Alexander called today asking for a meeting. I looked out at the sunset painting the city in gold. What does he want? To apologize. He says he wants to make amends. After months of silence, my son wanted reconciliation, not because he'd found integrity, but because he'd finally felt the consequences of his choices. What should I tell him? Eleanor asked. Tell him I'm busy building something beautiful, I said calmly. If he wants to be part of something meaningful, he can apply to work at the foundation like anyone else. I smiled, not unkindly. If he shows real change and genuine remorse, we might consider letting him earn forgiveness. And if he doesn't, I added, he'll remain exactly what he chose to become, relevant to my story. That night, I sat on my terrace with a glass of wine, reading thank you letters from scholarship recipients, young women whose lives had been transformed by money that had once been stolen for luxury handbags. In my peripheral vision, Central Park stretched out like a green oasis amid the urban jungle, beautiful, persistent, resilient. Despite everything that had tried to diminish it, my phone flashed 17 missed calls from Alexander. I deleted them without a second thought. Some relationships can be rebuilt through forgiveness and growth. Others end when people reveal who they truly are. The wisdom lies in knowing the difference and having the strength to act accordingly. Tomorrow, I would wake up as Margaret Wilson, business leader, philanthropist, corporate ethics expert, and grandmother to an extraordinary young man, not someone's dismissed mother or overlooked family member, but a woman who had built something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes, it's becoming so powerful that their opinions no longer matter. Their actions lose all consequence, and their absence feels like a gift rather than a loss. And the quiet of this new life, surrounded by purpose instead of pain, I finally understood what true victory looked like. It looked like peace. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.